And good morning, Governor State University. We are the professors of Ask the Professors. At least 5 out of the 6 of us, we have returned in the days following the largest turnout election in United States history, with upwards of 100 million, ballots cast early and by mail, and upwards of 200 million. Bill will correct me, I'm sure, on the actual numbers of total votes cast. We're here to discuss where we are, the state of the election presently, and I'm just going to begin by putting this screen up. Can my co-panelists see that screen there?
Yes.
Yes. Great. And that is where most of the news organizations are putting the race, with Joe Biden at 253 electoral votes, Donald Trump at 214 electoral votes, and 71 electoral votes still too close to call. Now, there is a caveat to this, I must say, that the Associated Press, which is one of the most reputable press agencies, and in fact was the agency back in 2000 that did not call Florida on the night of the election, which has given them a lot of cultural gravitas to add to their 150-year reporting history. The Associated Press called Arizona on election night and has continued to maintain that Arizona is called for Joe Biden. Fox News also on election night called Arizona for Joe Biden. This is what the map looks like with that taken into account. This map also shows where the ballot counting stands currently in the states that have not been called by the Associated Press. Joe Biden enjoys, I believe, an 8,000 ballot lead currently in the state of Nevada. They will be announcing at about noon today. And Donald Trump enjoys leads of varying amounts in the tens of thousands. Varying amounts in the thousands in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. The race is closest in Georgia, where it's down at last look to between 13 and 14,000 ballots. And just for reference's sake, I'm going to put up the 2016 map. This was not the actual way that the Electoral College went, because a few people were, Bill, what's the phrase when an Electoral College voter changes his or her vote? Faithless. So-called faithless electors. But this is the way it looked when before the ballots were actually finalized in the Electoral College. And as you can see,
an unfaithful, a faithless elector.
Faithless elector. And as you can see from this map, so far, Joe Biden has cut into Donald Trump's win in Wisconsin, Michigan, and a single vote in Nebraska. And by the way, my correction was correct. My prediction was correct. Both Maine and Nebraska will be splitting their votes this year. And if you count Arizona the way the Associated Press and Fox News do, Joe Biden has cut into Donald Trump's 2016 numbers there as well. And for the sake of fairness, I would also add that Donald Trump has not cut into the blue states that you see on the 2016 map here at all. So the only change so far is in favor of the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. But at that point, I'm going ahead and unless one of my co-panelists wants to talk about the map, I'm going to stop sharing and bring us all back up here and open it up to my panelists. What are you seeing? What's going on? What's the most interesting things that intrigue you this morning, 48 hours after Election Day?
This whole election could come down to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, because that one single elector can swing the whole thing. Because as it looks right now, and again, we'll know better in a couple of hours when Nevada issues a report, is that Biden will win with 270 electors, the absolute minimum to win. And that will probably be a dark cloud over his presidency. but he will have a majority of the vote. Now, if you recall, he said 4 years ago there were attempts to get electors to switch. Hillary Clinton supporters, especially out of Hollywood, were practically bribing electors to switch their votes. There was a case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Pardon?
Well, I guess now that the ballots are all in, you can't accuse us of playing politics anymore. So I guess you could say whatever you want.
Well, the ballots are not all in.
Oh, they're in. Oh, well, they're in the post office or they're in your office. But
okay, they may not have yet been delivered, but
now that nobody can vote, what I'm saying is now that nobody can vote anymore, we can't be accused of trying to convince our students to vote a certain way. So I guess we can be a little bit more partisan in this conversation, and that's what I'm accusing you of doing. But that's
I think the way we describe things, though, still matters, certainly,
yes.
right? The words we use to describe things are still really important. So.
Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, this thing is not over. As you pointed out, Nevada's reporting, last thing was 8,000 vote difference with only 75% of the vote in. I have a feeling there's some folks in the Nevada Election Commission are also got some money in a betting pool out there and are just trying to maximize their winnings. Just kidding, Nevada people. But it really could come down to Nevada, and then you get into the faithless electors. By the way, many states have laws that prevent electors from switching their votes, and that was in the past, I think, 2 years, upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Now, 4 years ago, none of the Trump electors was faithless, correct?
That is correct.
So really, the winning team, if you will, they tend to have very strong discipline because it matters to make sure.
Right, and the losing electors very often, knowing their candidate's going to lose, will. In fact, I think Bernie Sanders picked up a couple of votes in the Electoral College,
right.
So this happens on occasion, but this time it could come down to one elector. And let's remember, what would happen if an elector gets sick with the pandemic going around? Then they don't get the 270, and
now, Bill, wouldn't the
all heck breaks loose?
I think that state in question would certify a different person as that elector.
Probably.
Well, let's hear from.
I'm just looking at all of the things.
Let's hear from Mary and Elliot and/or Jim. What are your thoughts? Anyone?
Well, my big takeaway is that this was a really good election for the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell is perhaps the biggest winner. He solidifies his place as Senate Majority Leader again. The Republicans, while they don't control the House, they increased their numbers, so they made further inroads. Biden, let's assume that he will be the next president, enters office without a mandate, without any way of getting a legislative agenda passed. And the Republican Party sees that it doesn't have to win majorities to win elections. I mean, political polarization, quite frankly, works for the Republican Party as a strategy. So I think for me, those are kind of the big initial takeaways. I'd be curious what you all think about why the pollsters were so wrong. I don't know if any of us know yet, but that seems to be another big story in yet another election. And anybody who has given up on trusting any polling can be forgiven for that at this point, because it has proven to be totally unreliable.
Well, I don't know if I'd quite go that far. I think as the mail-in, we saw this in 2016 where the national polling was pretty spot on and the mistakes were in the states. And in 2018, what we saw was as the mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and early ballots finally got all counted, the polls looked pretty darn accurate. What I'm seeing are a few major blunders, which don't ultimately affect the race. I think Florida, the pollsters were significantly off, but in the rest of the country, remember, one of my predictions was it's very unlikely that Biden is going to win in the 350 range. It's far more likely to be a much tighter race. If indeed, as the Biden camp predicts, Pennsylvania and Georgia go for Biden ultimately, as they count all the votes, I think we're looking at pollsters being pretty accurate in most of the state races. Jim, Mary, or Elliot, if you'd like to rebut me, which is okay.
No, that's great.
Well, Bill, I'd like to ask you the question, since you mentioned one of the electors could get sick with COVID out there. Are there alternates for the electors?
Right. The states would probably, put somebody forward to replace that elector. It's not, but again, this would all come down to the state law. Article 1, Section 4 leaves all of the procedural matters for federal elections in the hands of the state legislatures, which is going to be prompting a lot of the litigation that's going to be coming up in the next few days as well. So depending on what their state legislates or what the law in that state is, most states allow some sort of replacement, but yeah, if it's not allowed, then it's 269, and that's not enough to elect a president. So keep your fingers crossed. As I say, if you get 269, then it goes to the House of Representatives, who vote as a delegation after the new Congress seats, which we don't know what that is going to look like yet. So, and then the Senate votes on vice president. I'm frankly, I'd love the civics lesson in this. It's a teachable moment. We could end up with a Biden-Pence administration or a Trump-Harris administration.
Ooh, that'd be fun. That'd be fun.
That would be fun. That would make for a very interesting State of the Union address, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Reality television show. Yes.
Have Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris behind the president. That would be
looking at the actuarial tables. I think a lot of Democrats would embrace a Trump Harris administration.
So have you given up on Georgia and Pennsylvania? Because I noticed that the conversation is as though those states are out of play.
Sounds like Bill has.
I think that they're both in place still. It's looking very favorable for Trump. Pennsylvania is interesting because there are already lawsuits filed there because a state judge extended the number of days in which they can accept vote by mail ballots. It went up to the Supreme Court on an expedited calendar just to stay that state court ruling. The Supreme Court voted no. State court ruling stays in effect. It can come back up now on a full briefing. And again, it revolves around this language in the Constitution that says state legislatures write the rules. And the argument is, well, that's a state court. They can't do it. And so, Pennsylvania could be in play for a number of weeks.
So I study this from a slightly different angle than most of my esteemed panelists. Looking at this, I look at it from a communication studies standpoint, political communication and public discourse. So one of the things that I have been observing is how people talk about it, and that has been. I don't know if you actually picked this up in the video. A bird just came by and hit my hair. That was amazing. Sorry. All right.
That's good luck.
Is it? Okay, good. I'll take it. The way people talk about it. So there's, so you have people we've known, or at least it's been communicated that hey, because of the pandemic, there are a lot of mail-in ballots, and so we're not going to know that night. And you still had some people who, particularly people on the left who they so badly wanted this to be a sharp rebuke of the Trump presidency that they wanted a blowout the first night. And so you've seen them kind of bemoan the results. You've seen people. So some people on the other end of the political spectrum, where it's been talked about for literally weeks that this is corrupt, that it's going to be stolen. So there's what we call in rhetoric this rhetorical priming, where these statements are put out over time that yes, when those accusations are actually made, and I think really significant accusations questioning the legitimacy of, while certainly not perfect, whatever perfect looks like, an outstanding process and system of elections. One of the best, most fair, accurate in history. When that is questioned, there's all this rhetorical priming that makes people say, yeah, it is. Particularly if it's not the result you want, and particularly if you have this larger narrative that you see the world through of we are victims that everyone is attacking. And I'll even add the racial component, because I think this is certainly not the only thing we see, but part of what we see when people are worried about the urban vote. That's, my history scholars here can certainly chime in on this. The fact that some white people in America are losing their minds about how black people voting and saying that we need to shut it down, stop the vote. That's significant in terms of our public discourse and the way we interact with each other, the way we view our nation. Anyways, sorry, that was the long thing, but yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this from a communications standpoint.
Elliot, would you like to chime in a little bit on the history that Jim was alluding to? I know you and I talked. Sure. Mary, we talked a little bit about it before we started the show.
Right. Yeah. So we can cite a long history of the disenfranchisement of Black voters following the 15th Amendment during Reconstruction. Right. It becomes increasingly difficult at the end of Reconstruction and afterwards during a long Jim Crow era for Black Americans to actually cast ballots, right? Full enfranchisement of African Americans dates to 1965, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at is a very short history of being able to say, in all honesty, that African Americans are full citizens of the United States. And, I guess if we're allowed to maybe lay out our cards here, Donald Trump is constantly race baiting, right? This is racist dog whistles left and right from Trump. And, I think Jim's insights are really important here, that this political priming here is all geared towards, getting Trump the election, damn the consequences. And the consequences, of course, are that we will see further polarization, further mistrust. And so it seems like, from my perspective, this is a really dangerous time in American history, but one that is kind of commensurate with our longer history, post Civil War.
Right up to Donald Trump's rhetorical attempted coup on the night of the election. And I see Bill is furrowing his brow, but when the president of the United States calls states in his own favor that the states themselves and the press have not called for him, states that in fact now appear to be, Michigan and Wisconsin in particular, appear to be going Democratic, that's a very dangerous thing. I would agree with Elliot. in that
I would
case.
like to just jump in and talk a little bit. I also deal with framing, Jim, and looking at policy. And I want to talk about the word urban, particularly in Detroit, given the fact that I am from Detroit. And when the discussion that Wayne County votes had not come in yet, and that was the urban vote. I'd like to say that Detroit's urban vote doesn't necessarily racially look like Detroit looked 10 years ago. Given the resurgence and rebirth of Detroit after the decline in population, different races have moved into the city of Detroit. So this idea of urban usually is another word for Black and people of color, but there are many white Americans in the city of Detroit. It has a white mayor. So just wanted to put that out there about this word urban and what urban is also evolving into. And I want to pose the idea of how can America stay the same and keep the same ideology in so many ways when the world really is changing. And I think that is where this election has caused us to really look at, we might wanna make America great again and again, but what does that really mean to people of color? When before 1965, America really was not great in terms of freedom to vote for African-American women, whereas Caucasian women had the right to vote long before. And African-American women really spoke their voices. And as an African-American woman sitting here, I must commend African-American women and women of color for speaking their voice and being able to play a major role in this particular election. So I wanted to say that, and I was listening to a Latino conversation last night about the fear of the words in Florida of Hispanics really feeling like Florida was going to become socialist, communism. Those words, another Hispanic reporter stated, were very scary to people who fled to this country for freedom. So when the president did go there, speaking those words meant different things, brought up trauma for that particular population. And this all deals with communication. It deals with how issues are framed politically. Thus, what people hear in the media has to do with what they think about, and what people think about can affect them when they go to the poll. And I'll pass.
Let's pick up on that thread. What's going on with the Latino vote in this cycle?
It seems like the Latinx. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
No, go ahead. You start, Elliot.
Just really briefly, I think the Latinx vote does seem to be somewhat divided. We've got anecdotal evidence right now that if Arizona goes to Biden, officially, that he's going to have Latinx activists to thank for that, in part, right? So the story in Arizona, it seems, is looking a bit different than the story in Florida, which is to say that you can't look at the Latinx population and consider it a monolith, right? Mm-hmm. And it also underscores a point that that I think we would all want to make to listeners and viewers here, which is that local politics matter. Getting involved matters, right? Those things that happen on the ground in Florida and Arizona clearly have an effect.
I would add Texas as well. Texas is sort of in the middle on this question, and it seems that whereas in Florida you have the Cuban and the Venezuelan constituencies that are moved by certain dog whistles about socialism and communism, and as Elliot pointed out, in Arizona it's on the other, it's going in the other direction. In Texas, I would argue that most Latinx people are assimilationist in the European sense, the idea of the European immigrant coming over and assimilating into racist white society. And so that's why one of the things that is interesting in Texas is people have been talking for 20 years of it becoming a purple state. And every time it comes close, it doesn't actually do it. And I think a lot of that is because Latino voters are not as monolithically democratic, especially in Texas, for these reasons.
Just if, you know, I think one of the things we can draw from this election, from what we know so far, is a lot of the old assumptions based on race need to be rethought, if not thrown out. Donald Trump received more votes from African Americans and Hispanics than any Republican in the last 60 years.
Right.
To look at the Hispanic or Latinx community as monolithic is nonsense. I've spoken to a number of folks, and frankly, very few use the term Latinx. But they're like, you know, we are Cuban and Mexican and actually people from Spain get included in there sometimes, and Central America and South America, and they're like, no, we're all different. And I think we have to rethink this. I think it was Elliot brought up the idea of racial dog whistles. And there was an interesting study done by Quinnipiac University and Monmouth University about where the researchers provided sentences with what the researchers said were racist dog whistles, and the vast majority of voters didn't see anything particularly racist in the statements, and those who and then across the board, all white, black, Hispanic agreed with the statement. So I think our researchers may have to go back and get in the field and see what's really going on in there. It's like the polling. I'm sorry, the polling was wrong. They were looking for a blue wave. They were predicting a blue wave. It was a blue drip. And I think it's for two reasons. One is methodology that they use, again, making assumptions about the people that they are polling. And two, people lie to pollsters. One of the reasons is they see pollsters as a branch of the media which they perceive as biased. I think it's even worse now, and it's kind of self-feeding. At least half of the nation now look at the news media, not just biased, but corrupt. And I think these last few weeks with Twitter and Google and Facebook, shutting down and revoking stories about Hunter Biden and such, only made it that much worse. So I think in the coming days, we're going to see maybe a rejection of what we would consider mainstream media and a reinvigoration of alternative medias, much like we did on AM radio a few decades ago when Rush Limbaugh came on the scene. There's a prediction.
I think that's you may be right. And I think what we've seen in the past decade, and Jim could chime in here as well, we talked about this last week, the fact that so many people get their news from Google news feeds that take them down these rabbit holes, link them into Facebook and other social media. And taking them away from traditional print media where journalists actually have ethics and are trained to a standard. One of the things I wanted to say last week, which we didn't have time to do, was one of the people who was in the audience asked, who should we trust in terms of news media? And I gave the person some answers in the Q&A. But one thing you always need to look for, folks, I think, in your news is, does this news source have a corrections page? that's kind of the bellwether of whether you could trust these people or not, because news stories always have mistakes, but is this a news organization that's willing to admit its mistakes? You know, the New York Times has an entire page of corrections every day, and there's a digital page of it as well. And when you
Which
look
tells
at
you something about them.
the big moments in New York Times ethical history, I think of Jason Blair and that scandal back in 2003. And the New York Times fired its editor for it because unethical things happened and they owned up to it and they had a standard. Facebook doesn't seem to, Twitter doesn't seem to.
Right. So I think maybe a thread between some of the last couple of conversations, and you know, some of us may not like this answer, but this is hard, and this is difficult. This is ongoing work. So we can't just create an algorithm that predicts what people always think, or this type of person always thinks, or this area of the country always thinks. Like, that's because by the time you create it, the world's changed and it's different. And that's not, you know, so yes, sure, let's create algorithms, but let's not lose touch with what's actually happening on the ground, because people are complex. I mean, if I look at some of my statements I made 15 years ago, they probably changed, right? And I'm a single human being. So to chalk up an entire group of people, you know, is problematic. And also, you know, the same way like things like the media and the news, that's complex as well. So there's no such thing as the media. It doesn't exist. There's a number of different types of media. And I think also another like complexity is, you know, and shout out to the philosophers, like epistemology. What is truth? How do we know what is true? And I think it certainly has to be more than it affirms what I want to believe about the world. Because otherwise you're getting ripped off by your tuition dollars, right? I mean, truth should confront and change you and transform you. That doesn't mean we don't come to reality with lenses and scopes that we understand it through, but we can certainly, as we encounter reality, as we encounter truths, it should change who we are and our understanding of the world. So I certainly, I would agree that some people they're not going to like what they read in a paper. And so they find someone's blog that, you know, it's some dude in their underwear in their parents' basement, you know, typing away in rage, and it feels really good for them. Yeah, I want to be pissed off, so this must be true. But that's not truth. And it is significantly different to have an editorial board that calls you on BS. So I don't know if I can say that in an official university thing, but
Bologna
yeah,
sausage.
so I think there's a big
on how
nice.
official of the university thing
There is a difference there. And so, for instance, here in I live in Wisconsin, so a little different than Illinois in terms that we're a battleground state. And so the race has been called, but there's all kinds of accusations now that it was actually stolen. Mm-hmm. And you know, and that shouldn't be a surprise because that's been the priming for weeks. But a former governor who, anyways, a former governor today retweeted this fake news site about you know, ballot drops and stuff like, and it's like, that's not, yeah. This is clearly a fake news site. If there's
how hard would it be to actually steal a presidential election?
How hard?
Yes.
Professor Fraud here.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it would be. Well, there's two questions really in there. How hard would it be to steal it, and how hard would it be to steal it and get away with it? And fraud is all about the surreptitious. As I tell audience and have for the last few months, is there election fraud out there? Yes, and the studies by the Brennan Center notwithstanding, their methodology is not that good. Yes, but as we've sort of alluded to, Tip O'Neill's famous statement that all politics is local, so is all fraud. election fraud. It's nice to get your candidate for president elected, but he's not going to get your brother-in-law a job on a city garbage truck. Your committee man, your alderman, your state rep, that is where we see election fraud. Usually it comes from the idea that, for example, in Illinois, your committeeman sits on the county and state central committee of the party. They get weighted votes depending on how many people come out and vote for their party. That's why you have a lot. That's the incentive to get fraud. So now, could you steal a presidential election? Yes. And if you were going to, this would be the election to do because of how close it is. How many votes would you need to swing or to create to steal it? Depending on where it is, not that many. And I think one of the problems, in addition to the priming of the stories, and by the way, Jim, that former governor of Wisconsin went to school with my wife, who's a journalist by profession. So I know I can tell you stories. But anyway, you could get away with it for the short term, but then the opposing party would find out about it. This is why when we count votes, when we run an election, we have judges of election from both parties there. We have observers there. It's not that the fraud won't occur, it's that somebody will see it and catch it and hopefully will litigate it. This would be the election. If you're going to commit voter fraud with all of the ballots that were mailed out and the Carter-Baker Commission some years ago said that, mail-in voting has the greatest potential for fraud. This would be the one to do it, which is why we really have to settle down, count the votes, obey the law. If the rule says you don't count ballots that arrive after election day, you don't count those ballots. We follow the law and then just see what happens at the end. But yeah, you could do it, but I don't think you'd get away with it.
Well, I think one of the most historically famous incidents of fraud at this level was Lyndon Johnson's election to the Senate in 1948, where it was incredibly close, and he basically made a phone call to a friendly precinct captain in a particular county, and suddenly more votes were added to the total. That's in a situation back then where there aren't observers from both parties, observing the actual counting of ballots the way we're seeing right now in Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and in Maricopa County, Phoenix.
The big question here is, I think, comes down to which votes are valid and should be counted and which should be excluded. I think that's going to be the battle we're going to see in this election. No hanging chads this time.
Yeah,
and
I'd
by
like
the way,
to jump in.
Jimmy Carter in his book talked about. Go ahead.
Oh yes.
Go ahead, Mary.
I wanted to jump in and I'm hoping we talk about the fair tax here in Illinois, which did not pass, and also I want to raise talking about some of the judges that were on Illinois ballots and how much or little voters really know about those individuals. But before that, Jim, I was just thinking about the responsibility that's on individuals to read several different news outlets and then be able to make up one's mind. And I think that's what's so good about education. That's what's so good about Governor State University, in that what we're working to do is to educate the electorate so that when we read a proposition that's on the ballot that looks confusing, that you're not sure if you vote yes, will you be voting for? Or if you vote no, will you be voting for that particular issue? How some of the proposals are even worded are confusing for your average 18-year-old who just became able to vote. I think these are also some of the issues as thinkers and professors that we're going to have to begin to think about. As I've talked to people, I've had individuals tell me you know, how complicated the ballot itself it is for your average person trying to fill it out. And and they wondered, was it complicated, Elliot, if we were think back in history, was it complicated on purpose? Because literacy was an issue. And today literacy is an issue. So I know I've said a lot of different things, but my main point is with television, radio, print media, blogs, Facebook, BBC, if we read internationally or, you know, listen internationally, there's a lot for an individual to read through to decipher what truth is to them. And they need to be able to weigh all of that in addition to the rhetoric and the priming and the framing that's going on in the world of politics and communication. So start wherever you all. I've put some ideas out.
Okay, I'm going to step in on that one. Yes, when students ask me, when they ask the question, you know, what newspaper should I read or what news channel should I watch? I tell them, you've asked the wrong questions. It's what newspapers, plural, what TV channels, plural, you should be doing. Because it's not just, you know, I mean, different credible news sources will present the truth, but we have to remember editors and editorial boards also decide the prioritization of the news. What stories go into the newspaper? Is it a front page? Is it back in the back? So I'll give them a selection. New York Times, which I used to contribute to, the Wall Street Journal, you know, the local newspapers, both sadly we're down to 2 and they're, you know, shadows of their former selves. As I say, my wife was an editor at the New Orleans Times-Picayune, and I mean, one of the great newspapers in Americans, and especially in the South. And what TV channels, you know, yes, CNN and MSNBC, but Fox News and hear the whole, you know, the cacophony of stories that are out there. As Barack Obama said, you know, democracy is hard work, and as you sort of alluded to before, and as H.L. Mencken said, I love this quote, a great journalist, democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard. So that's what we're confronted with. As to the ballot, yes, there is the ballot that actually was in my precinct. 2
Is that
pages,
a Brooks
both
Brothers
sides.
rebellion right there? Or is that what we're seeing?
Is that what?
Are you engaging in a Brooks Brothers rebellion right now, Bill?
Yes, but
Taking ballots out of Chicago.
yeah, yes. This is what a Chicago voter is confronted with. We have over 400 different types because of all the different jurisdictions cutting back and forth. All of it, much of it, due to just this one sheet, the B form. That's all of our judges. We elect our judges in Illinois. Most states don't. And then we also have in Illinois, especially out in the suburbs, Chicago, we have 50 wards. Okay, 50. We have the largest city council of any major city. And then Illinois has all of these special districts. We've got, you know, water reclamation districts, we have library districts, grammar school districts, high school districts, community college school districts, mosquito abatement districts, one of my favorite. And that was due to what was originally a good thing in the old Illinois Constitution that limited the ability of a municipality to issue bonds. They could not issue more bonds than 10% of the assessed value of the property in the jurisdiction. And so when a town got up close to it, they'd create a new form of government. So they made a park district that would issue its own bonds. They'd create a mosquito abatement district to do it, a tuberculosis district. And so we've got more government entities in Illinois than any other state. We have more elected politicians in Illinois than any other state. And that's going to lead to ridiculously long ballots, that's going to lead to voter confusion. And sometimes the political parties like it that way. You know, as I say, what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. Keep the voters confused. You just hand them that palm card, send them into the voting booth, and have them punch away with their little Sharpie, but don't bear down because it leaks through the other side. Okay, I'm done.
And as far as we know, Sharpie ballots are not being thrown out.
I got to chime in, Bill, as a public administrator. Some city managers and village presidents wish they wouldn't come to the meeting. And oftentimes, many community citizens don't show up to the meeting. Just let the same 10 keep coming.
Right,
Just want to share that joke.
Okay, you're right. You're right. Jim, I saw you laughing at me.
With you, I'm sure.
Oh, no, with, not at, with. Thoroughly enjoying it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do want to, going back a little while to what Bill was saying about people relaxing. Now, I certainly have, I care deeply about public life, and I think politics matter, elections matter. Spend a lot of time involved in working on this, and I will say yes, we need to relax. I think, I mean, even just for your own good, like if you know, some of us who have been watching since polls opened and kind of frantically looking at things, and everything's gonna, like, civilization's gonna twist on what happens in this particular moment, and then there's a different news report. So I think, yes, certainly some, you know, exhale, see what happens, and that doesn't mean stop working. I mean, I think all of us agree that, like, we need to work and we need to think hard, and this is tough, but not in a frantic, you know, where every headline dominates our entire day.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
there's a process to play out, and this year it's going to take longer than other years.
That's a good. I think that's a good way. A good way for us to pivot towards final comments. A lot of us have other meetings to get to. We committed to doing this for 1 hour, and I do thank you all so much for showing up. For those of you tuning in, we recorded this from 8:30 to 9:30 this morning on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Day, incidentally. But thanks, Jim. Other final thoughts from our panelists?
It's like,
I think for me, the one big takeaway just from listening to all of you with your various expertises is that we need to make sure that our community, meaning our students, but also alumni and other people who live around and care about Governor's State, are equipped to navigate the fraught electoral process of Illinois and of the United States. So that's a serious job. That's a job that we all take pretty seriously. And I'm really encouraged to have colleagues such as all of you. And we will continue to work hard. So that's, I guess, my statement to the broader public. I guess in thinking about next steps, whether you're elated or disappointed with the results of the election, it does seem that that moving forward, we need to get involved in whatever way we are comfortable with and able to in American democracy. And part of that means that we need to kind of inoculate ourselves against disinformation, right? This has been one of the, I think, major issues that we've faced for, at the very least, the past 4 years, right? The proliferation of misinformation for a number of reasons. That's something that we in higher education must combat. And so, you know, my research is on, in part, climate change. So I'm kind of used to thinking about how do we dispel disinformation about the climate crisis. And so I think, you know, focusing on what constitutes a verifiable source of information, that's basic work that we can do in intro level classes, and that's work that we need to continue doing. And, you know, if we as citizens aren't sure what is verifiable, then we can talk to each other, talk to colleagues, talk to experts, right? So like, I think this kind of like alternative facts world that we seem to exist in, for the sake of democracy, it can't continue to exist, right? We have to fight that tooth and nail. And that would be just my sort of final thought on everything.
Thank you. I think Mary would like to.
I guess I would like to see, I would not like to see our systems delegitimized. I would also like to say that freedom is freedom, but exercising one's freedom at the expense of placing fear into another citizen's mind, you know, it becomes problematic. So, and what I mean, for example, with the people who are doing their job, for example, last night counting votes, and yet having to experience fear to leave that place where they were counting votes because people are armed. Yes, we're free to be armed, but we also must, with our freedom of speech and the freedoms to write and do different things, we must also be respectful to other human beings with different ideas. That's what I love about education, is that I've worked at Governor's State to educate our students to feel free to think differently, to be able to articulate your thoughts with someone who may disagree with you, but yet your voice matters. So I guess my final words as we leave this conversation is to just encourage everyone that your voice matters here in the United States of America. And for all of those of us who voted, you know, it's great that we were able to vote and we were able to participate in the process. And no matter what the decision is, hooray for people really getting it out, as I said on the first show, and participating in the process. And I'm excited about not just participating in the process for our students voting. There's a lot of learning to do between now and 2 years from now when the next congressional election is, and what a role we play as professors to participate in that process with our students and with the surrounding communities and the world. With this being on the internet, the world will hear what we're doing at Governor State University. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Bill, final thoughts?
Yeah. As an election official, I'd like to get across that election officials believe in democracy, believe in doing it fairly, believe in doing it right. Will there be corruption in elections? Yeah, again, usually at the small local level. Great book on this, by the way, $5 and a Pork Chop Sandwich by Mary Frances Berry, who used to head the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. It tells stories, and there's a whole chapter on Chicago in there. But election official, one of the most corrosive things that could happen is, and studies have showed this, I think 25% of voters say, and this was a couple of months ago, and the numbers have ticked up since then, that if their candidate didn't win the presidency, then there was fraud or they were cheating. Okay, and there are different theories on this. My favorite is that this is the result of giving every child a participation trophy. They expect to always win. I think we have to realize that, you know what, maybe half of our fellow citizens think otherwise, and that's okay. Talk to them, have them talk to you. Maybe they'll persuade you to their side, or you persuade them to your side, but that's the way the system works. And I always love cartoons that look like this. The day after the election, You know, the elephant and the donkey, and sometimes they show them, you know, cut and bruised with boxing gloves on, but shaking hands. As Lincoln said, we're not enemies. We're fellow citizens. Let's remember that going forward. The politicians will do their thing, and the pundits will say their thing. But all of us together, we're citizens. We have the right to hold whatever opinions we have. Unfortunately, I was going to say, get together with your family at Thanksgiving and don't have fights, but we can't even do that now except by Zoom. But just the system works. You may not win, but it works. So in the words of that great philosopher, Taylor Swift, everyone just calm down.
Thanks, Bill. And a final word from yours truly. What, on that vein, what most impressed me.
Did Jim get a final word?
What? Oh, I thought Jim started us with his final word. But Jim,
okay.
Have a final word? You're good?
Okay, he's good.
I was most impressed with how calm and peaceful Election Day went. And I'm really hoping to see that continue, no matter what the outcome is. Every 4 years we have the opportunity to say this. I'll say it as loudly as I possibly can, in as many venues as I possibly can. Every vote counts. You need to vote. Get out there and get your voice heard. You're doing it more than ever before, but there's still a whole chunk of the American electorate that is not participating, and you need to get out there and be a part of it. I said in my final predictions last week that the chances of Trump winning were small, but they were greater than a Democratic blowout. And that is still the case. The chances of a Democratic blowout at this point are extremely negligible, like 1%, and everything suddenly changes in the next few hours. The chances of a Trump victory are still somewhere between 30 and 40%, given the fact that he could win Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada. And I think we all expect him to win Alaska. However, if I had to pick one person to be this morning, and I had the choice between being Joe Biden or Donald Trump, oh, well, actually, I don't want to be president, so I suppose I'd pick Donald Trump. But if I had the choice to be a supporter, I am a supporter, but close supporter in the camp of Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I very much want to be in Wilmington, Delaware today. Things are looking very, very good for the Biden campaign. We can't predict what the next few hours will hold. Watch for Nevada to finalize, or to come close to finalizing around noon today. And if that does happen, it looks like it's 270. I would expect, though, that either Pennsylvania or Georgia will also ultimately go into Joe Biden's column. But I want to take another opportunity to thank my co-panelists, Elliot Fackler, Jim Vining, Mary Bruce, and Bill Cressy of Governor State University, Don Culverson in absentia, and everyone else who helped and participated. And with that, thanks for voting, and go out and learn.
Okay.